in the 30th year, in the 4th month, on the 5th day, a priest in exile, by the Kebar River in Babylon. The year is 593 BCE. His name is Ezekiel. And on that day, he says, the heavens opened. I looked, and behold, a stormy wind came from the north, an immense cloud with flashing fire, a radiance around it. And from the midst of the fire came something like ashmal, gleaming metal. What happens next is one of the most detailed, most specific, and most debated visions in human history. 2,500 years later, a NASA engineer will design a spacecraft based on this description, and patent it. Jewish mystics will call it forbidden knowledge. UFO researchers will say it's the clearest ancient encounter on record. Theologians will say it's the throne of. Tonight, we don't tell you what to believe. We show you what Ezekiel actually described, and let you decide what he saw. Before we dive into the text, let's be clear about the three major interpretations. These aren't fringe theories, each has serious proponents, documented history, and evidence they claim explains the details. Interpretation 1, the divine throne chariot. Traditional Jewish and Christian view. What Ezekiel saw was the Merkabah, God's chariot throne. A theophany. A manifestation of divine glory using temple and throne imagery familiar to an exiled priest. This is Merkabah mysticism, considered so powerful and dangerous that rabbinic tradition forbade teaching it publicly. Interpretation 2, the extraterrestrial spacecraft. In 1974, Josef Blumrich, chief of NASA's Systems Layout Branch, published the Spaceships of Ezekiel. He argued Ezekiel witnessed an ancient astronaut craft. He reverse-engineered its design from the biblical description. He even patented an omnidirectional wheel based on Ezekiel's wheel within a wheel. Mainstream scholars call it pseudoscience. But a NASA engineer took it seriously enough to file a patent. Interpretation 3, the visionary psychological experience. Ezekiel wasn't lying. He genuinely experienced what he described. But the source wasn't external, it was internal. A mystical altered state. An ecstatic vision. Perhaps neurological, temporal lobe phenomena, migraine aura. The experience was real to Ezekiel, regardless of whether the wheels and beings existed outside his mind. 3 frameworks. Same text. Tonight, we examine all three, because the description itself is too precise to dismiss. Let's start with what Ezekiel actually said. The year is 593 BCE. 5 years after King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon deported the Israelites, including the priests, the nobles, and the skilled workers. Ezekiel is among them. A priest in exile. Living by the Kebar Canal near Nippur, in the land of the Chaldeans. He's 30 years old, the age when a priest would begin temple service. But there is no temple. It's in ruins back in Jerusalem. And then, on the 5th day of the 4th month, something happens. Ezekiel writes, "The heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God." This isn't metaphor. This isn't parable. This is eyewitness testimony. Ezekiel describes what he saw with forensic precision, step by step, detail by detail, as if he's trying to make sense of it himself. And the first thing he sees is the storm. Ezekiel 1 verse 4. Here's what he says, word by word. I looked, and behold, a stormy wind came from the north. An immense cloud with flashing fire. A radiance around it. And from within the fire, something like ashmal, gleaming metal. Ashmal. In Hebrew. The word appears almost nowhere else in the Hebrew Bible. Ancient translators rendered it as amber or electrum, a glowing, metallic substance. Today, it's the modern Hebrew word for electricity. But Ezekiel isn't done. Because what comes out of that fire, what emerges from the ashmal, is where the description becomes impossible to ignore. For living creatures. The ḥayyot. And they are unlike anything on earth. Ezekiel 1, verses 5 through 11. The ḥayyot. The living creatures. And here's where the description becomes almost forensic in its detail. From within the fire came the likeness of 4 living creatures. They had a human form, but each had 4 faces and 4 wings. 4 faces. Each creature had 4. A human face in front, a lion face on the right, an ox face on the left, an eagle face in the rear. 4 directions. Always watching. Always facing forward, yet seeing in every direction simultaneously. Their legs were straight. The soles of their feet were like the hooves of a calf, gleaming like burnished bronze. Not bent legs. Not articulated joints like animals. Straight. Rigid. Bronze hooves. Under their wings, on their 4 sides, they had human hands. Wings, but hands beneath them. Human hands. Functioning, grasping hands. Here's the detail that catches everyone's attention. Each went straight ahead. They did not turn as they moved. Wherever the spirit would go, they would go, without turning. Multidirectional movement. No rotation. No pivoting. Each face led in its own direction, human forward, lion right, ox left, eagle backward, and they moved without turning. If you're a NASA engineer reading this in 1974, you're thinking, omnidirectional propulsion. If you're a theologian, you're thinking, divine transcendence of physical limitation. If you're a neurologist, you're thinking, geometric hallucination patterns. But Ezekiel isn't interpreting. He's describing. And he's not done. Ezekiel 1:15. This is where the vision earns its name. As I looked at the living creatures, I saw a wheel on the ground beside each of the four wheels. One beside each creature. And the wheels themselves are strange. The appearance of the wheels and their workmanship was like the gleam of beryl. And the four had the same likeness, their appearance and workmanship being as if a wheel were within a wheel. A wheel within a wheel. In Hebrew, Ophan betok ha'ophan. Not on a wheel. Not attached to a wheel. Within. Nested. Intersecting. Perpendicular. As for their rims, they were tall and awesome. And their rims were full of eyes all around. Full of eyes. Hebrew. Eyes covering the rims. Watching. Seeing. Observing in all directions. If you're Josef Blumrich, you're thinking, sensor arrays. Visual feedback systems. Navigation technology. If you're a medieval Jewish mystic, you're thinking, angelic intelligence. Divine omniscience made visible. If you're a psychologist, you're thinking, archetypal symbolism of awareness and perception. And then Ezekiel describes the movement. When the creatures moved, the wheels moved beside them. When the creatures rose from the ground, the wheels rose. Wherever the spirit would go, they would go, and the wheels rose along with them, for the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. Coordinated. Synchronized. The wheels and the creatures move as one. Not mechanically connected, spiritually unified. Or, if you prefer, integrated propulsion system. When the creatures went, they went. When the creatures stood still, they stood still. When the creatures rose from the ground, the wheels rose together with them, for the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. Ezekiel is circling this point. He repeats it. As if he himself is trying to understand what he's seeing. The wheels and the beings are one system. This is the detail that will launch 1,000 theories. Wheels within wheels. Eyes all around. Omnidirectional movement. Motion without turning. But Ezekiel's not done. Because above the creatures, above the wheels, there's something else. Ezekiel 1 verse 22. Above the heads of the creatures. Over the heads of the living creatures there was the likeness of a firmament, like the gleam of awesome crystal, spread out above their heads. A rakia. A firmament. Like crystal. Transparent, gleaming, solid-looking. Stretched over the creatures like a platform. And above that, above the firmament over their heads was the likeness of a throne, in appearance like sapphire. And seated above the likeness of the throne was a likeness with a human appearance. A throne. Sapphire. Deep blue, translucent, glowing. And on it, a figure. Human-shaped. But not quite human. From what appeared to be his waist up, I saw something like ashmal, like fire enclosed all around. From what appeared to be his waist down, I saw something like fire. There was radiance all around him. Ashmal again. That gleaming, electric, metallic substance. Fire above. Fire below. Radiance surrounding. Like the appearance of the bow that is in the cloud on a rainy day, so was the appearance of the radiance all around. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of YHWH. A rainbow. Prismatic light. The same phenomenon that appears after the flood in Genesis, God's bow in the clouds. Here, surrounding the throne. This is the climax of the vision. The living creatures. The wheels. The firmament. The throne. The radiant figure. The rainbow light. Ezekiel calls it Kavod YHWH, the glory of the Lord. The visible manifestation of the divine presence. Or, if you're Blumrich, a command module. A cockpit. An occupant visible through transparent material, surrounded by propulsion glow. Or, if you're a psychologist, the culmination of an ecstatic vision, the numinous center, the encounter with transcendent presence, whether internal or external. 3 readings. Same text. All 3 explain some of the details. None explain all of them. But there's one more detail Ezekiel gives us. And it's the one that makes this feel less like symbolism and more like a sensory encounter. Sound. Ezekiel 1 verse 24. When they moved, I heard the sound of their wings, like the sound of mighty waters, like the voice of Shaddai, like the sound of tumult, like the sound of an army. Like many waters. Like the voice of the Almighty. Like an army marching. Loud. Overwhelming. Physical. The kind of sound you feel in your chest. When the creatures moved, I heard the sound. When they stood still, they lowered their wings. The sound corresponds to movement. When they move, roar. When they stop, silence. If you're a UFO researcher, you're cataloging auditory phenomena accompanying visual sighting. Propulsion noise. If you're a theologian, you're noting theophanic sound, like Sinai's thunder. If you're a neurologist, you're adding auditory hallucination consistent with temporal lobe activity. And there's the motion itself. Ezekiel describes the creatures and the fire among them moving back and forth like a flash, Hebrew, kemareha bazik, like the appearance of lightning. Not slow. Not stately. Fast. Instantaneous. Like lightning. UFO reports, erratic, high-speed, instantaneous directional changes. Divine visions, unearthly, transcendent motion. Neurological experiences, time distortion, rapid perceptual shifts. And then Ezekiel's response. When I saw this, I fell on my face. No interpretation. No theology. No analysis. Just visceral, overwhelming response. He falls. And I heard the voice of one speaking. He said to me, "Son of man, stand on your feet, and I will speak with you." The vision isn't over. It's just beginning. Ezekiel will see this again in chapter 10. The creatures, explicitly identified as cherubim. The wheels, called galgalim, the whirling ones. The glory departing from the temple. But for now, we have the description. And the question remains, what was it? Now let's examine the three frameworks that try to answer that question. Starting with the one that put Ezekiel's vision on the cover of a NASA engineer's book. 1973, Huntsville, Alabama. NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. A man named Josef F. Blumrich sits at his desk. He's chief of the systems layout branch, one of NASA's top engineers. He worked on the Saturn V rocket that put humans on the moon. He's designed spacecraft components, analyzed propulsion systems, reviewed engineering specifications for the Apollo program. And he's reading the Bible. Specifically, he's reading Ezekiel chapter 1. And he's not reading it for devotional purposes. He's reading it because he heard about Erich von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods, the 1968 bestseller claiming ancient astronauts visited Earth and were worshipped as gods. Von Daniken cited Ezekiel's vision as evidence. Blumrich thought it was nonsense. He decided to debunk it. Engineer versus pseudoscience. Open and shut case. Except when he started analyzing the text, verse by verse, detail by detail, something unexpected happened. He became convinced Ezekiel had described a spacecraft. In 1974, Blumrich published the Spaceships of Ezekiel. Not a fringe pamphlet. A detailed technical analysis with engineering diagrams, propulsion specs, and structural schematics. Published by Bantam Books. Translated into 7 languages. And it didn't just theorize, it reverse-engineered. Blumrich designed a working omnidirectional wheel based on Ezekiel's description. And he patented it. Blumrich's thesis was straightforward. Ezekiel witnessed multiple encounters with an extraterrestrial spacecraft, what Blumrich called a shuttlecraft used for planetary surveys. The vision wasn't symbolic. It was observational. Ezekiel, a priest with no engineering background, did his best to describe advanced technology using the only language he had, biblical, priestly, metaphorical. But strip away the religious framing, Blumrich argued, and you're left with a consistent, technically coherent description of a machine. Here's how Blumrich mapped it. The storm wind from the north, a spacecraft descending through clouds, turbulence from propulsion. The immense cloud with flashing fire, exhaust glow, plasma discharge, atmospheric ionization. The ashmole, gleaming metal. The hull. Reflective, metallic, glowing from heat or internal light. The 4 living creatures, not beings. Helicopter-like rotor blades. 4 of them, arranged around a central body. Each with faces, sensor pods. Each with wings, rotor blades. Straight legs, support struts. Bronze hooves, landing pods. The human hands under wings, mechanical manipulator arms for sample collection. The movement, without turning, omnidirectional flight. No need to pivot. Vertical takeoff and landing capability. The fire and lightning among them, propulsion bursts. Thrust adjustments. Engine glow. And then, the wheels. A wheel within a wheel. Blumrich saw it immediately, a gimbal system. 2 wheels intersecting at right angles, allowing movement in any direction without rotation of the main body. It's elegant. It's efficient. It solves a real engineering problem. How do you create omnidirectional ground mobility? And Blumrich didn't just theorize. He designed it. Built prototypes. Tested it. And on February 5, 1974, the United States Patent Office granted him U.S. Patent 3,789,947, omnidirectional wheel. The patent reads, an omnidirectional wheel assembly, comprising a pair of wheels independently rotatable about mutually perpendicular axes. Assigned to the United States of America, as represented by the administrator of NASA. A NASA engineer designed and patented a functional wheel based on a biblical description from 593 BCE. Whether or not Ezekiel saw a spacecraft, Blumrich's wheel works. It exists. It's used today in warehouse robotics, industrial vehicles, specialized mobility systems. Inspiration from Ezekiel chapter 1. So here's Blumrich's full interpretation. The wheel's full of eyes, not literal eyes. Sensors. Visual arrays. Navigation systems. The kind of omnidirectional observation equipment you'd need for precision landing on unknown terrain. The spirit of the living creatures in the wheels, integrated control. The wheels and the rotors move together because they're part of the same system. Fly-by-wire. Coordinated propulsion. The crystalline firmament, not sky. A transparent dome. The spacecraft's canopy. Clear material separating the command module from the propulsion assembly below. The throne of sapphire, a seat. A pilot's chair. Blue-tinted, translucent material. And the figure Ezekiel sees seated above, an extraterrestrial occupant. The pilot. The ashmal and fire around the figure, control panel glow. Instrument lights. The kind of ambient illumination you'd see in a cockpit. The rainbow, refracted light through the canopy material. Prismatic effect from curved transparent surfaces. The sound like mighty waters, engine noise. Rotor wash. Propulsion roar. Exactly what you'd expect from a hovering craft with multiple thrust sources. The movement, like a flash, rapid acceleration. Advanced propulsion allowing instantaneous directional changes. It's comprehensive. It's technically detailed. And it accounts for almost every element Ezekiel describes. Blumrich wasn't a fringe theorist. He was a NASA engineer with Saturn V on his resume. He didn't write this for conspiracy theorists, he wrote it because the description, to him, made engineering sense. So why do mainstream biblical scholars, archaeologists, and historians classify Blumrich's work as pseudoscience? 3 reasons. 1. It ignores context. Ezekiel was a priest trained in temple imagery. The vision uses language and symbols he already knew: cherubim, throne, divine glory. It fits perfectly within ancient Near Eastern religious tradition. No spacecraft needed. 2. It forces modern technology onto ancient symbolism. Blumrich reads, wheels full of eyes, and sees sensors. But Jewish tradition reads the same phrase and sees angelic intelligence. Ophanim, a class of angels attending God's throne. The text works symbolically without retrofitting technology. 3. There's no physical evidence. No artifacts. No landing sites. No corroborating witnesses. Just one man's vision, interpreted 2,600 years later by an engineer with a predetermined conclusion. And yet, Blumrich was credentialed. The patent is real. The wheel works. And the question lingers, if Ezekiel's description is purely symbolic, why does it map so neatly onto a functional engineering design? Maybe because symbolism and technology both obey logic. Maybe because human minds, ancient or modern, describe complex systems using the same structural patterns. Maybe because a NASA engineer saw what he expected to see, just like a medieval mystic saw what they expected to see. Or maybe, just maybe, there's something in that text we don't fully understand. Now let's turn to the interpretation that's endured for 2,500 years. The one that doesn't need spacecraft. The divine throne chariot. The Merkabah. Long before Josef Blumrich. Long before flying saucers. Long before anyone thought to read Ezekiel chapter 1 as a technical manual, there was Merkabah mysticism. Merkabah. Hebrew. The chariot. The divine throne chariot that carries the glory of God. This wasn't fringe speculation. This was the center of early Jewish mysticism. And it was considered dangerous. The Mishnah, the foundational text of Rabbinic Judaism, compiled around 200 CE, lays down strict rules. The chariot may not be expounded in the presence of even one student, unless he is wise and understands on his own. Merkabah mysticism was forbidden knowledge. Not because it was heretical. Because it was powerful. Dangerous. The kind of contemplation that could overwhelm, destabilize, or spiritually harm someone unprepared. Later Jewish lore warns of rabbis who attempted to ascend to the Merkabah in ecstatic visions. One went mad. One died. One became a heretic. Only Rabbi Akiva entered in peace and departed in peace. The vision wasn't a curiosity. It was a threshold. A doorway to encounter the divine presence in a way that transcended ordinary religious experience. And the word ashmal, that gleaming, electric substance Ezekiel saw, became so loaded with mystical significance that later tradition warned against even pronouncing it carelessly. This is what Ezekiel saw. not a spacecraft. The throne of the living God. And for 2,500 years, Jewish tradition has treated it with reverence and caution. Here's the detail that settles the question, if you're reading within the biblical tradition. Ezekiel chapter 10. The prophet sees the vision again, this time inside the Jerusalem temple. The glory of ḥayyot is departing. The living creatures reappear. The wheels are there. The fire. The movement. And this time, Ezekiel identifies them. These were the living creatures I had seen beneath the God of Israel by the Kebar River, and I realized that they were cherubim. Cherubim. Not aliens. Not sensors. Not rotor blades. Cherubim, the guardians of sacred space, the attendants of God's throne, the beings whose images stood in the Holy of Holies. In ancient Near Eastern iconography, Babylonian, Assyrian, Phoenician, cherubim are throne guardians. Composite beings. Human-animal hybrids. Often four-faced or multi-winged. They appear on thrones, on temple walls, flanking sacred trees. Ezekiel, a priest, knew this imagery. He was trained in it. The Jerusalem temple had two massive cherubim, carved from olive wood, overlaid with gold, standing 15 feet tall, wings outstretched, guarding the Ark of the Covenant. When Ezekiel sees the ḥayyot by the Kebar River, he's seeing the mobile version of what he knew from the temple. God's throne isn't stationary. It moves. It appears in exile. The glory that dwelt in Jerusalem now manifests in Babylon. The vision isn't describing technology. It's describing theophany, divine presence revealing itself in forms Ezekiel can recognize and interpret. In later Jewish angelology, developed during the Second Temple period and beyond, the Ophanim become a class of angels. Not machines. Not landing gear. Angels. They appear in the Book of Enoch, a text roughly contemporary with Ezekiel. They're mentioned in Jewish liturgy. They're part of the celestial hierarchy that includes cherubim, seraphim, thrones, and dominions. Maimonides, the great 12th century Jewish philosopher, places the Ophanim near the top of the angelic order, just below the seraphim who attend God's throne directly. The eyes all around aren't sensors. They're awareness. Intelligence. The Ophanim are conscious beings, not mindless wheels, but attendant spirits, seeing and perceiving in all directions because they exist in the presence of the all-seeing. The spirit of the living creatures in the wheels isn't integrated circuitry. It's unified will. The cherubim and the Ophanim move together because they serve the same purpose, directed by the same divine intent. This reading doesn't need engineering. It needs theology. And it's been the mainstream interpretation for 25 centuries. The Christian tradition reads Ezekiel chapter 1 the same way, theophany. A manifestation of God's glory. The four living creatures, cherubim, become associated with the four gospel writers. Matthew, human face; Mark, lion; Luke, ox; John, eagle. The vision prefigures the New Testament, the quadriform witness to Christ. The throne, the radiant figure, the rainbow, these are symbols of divine sovereignty, mercy, and covenant faithfulness. The glory of ḥayyot appearing to a people in exile, reminding them that God's presence isn't confined to geography. Early church fathers, Origen, Jerome, Gregory the Great, wrote commentaries on Ezekiel. None saw spacecraft. They saw divine mystery, symbolic richness, layers of meaning pointing to God's transcendence, immanence, and glory. The sound, like many waters, echoes the voice of the risen Christ in Revelation. The wheels moving without turning, divine action unconstrained by physical limitation. The eyes all around, God's omniscience made visible. It's coherent. It fits the biblical narrative. It requires no extraterrestrial visitors, no ancient technology, no anachronistic retrofitting. So why does the traditional interpretation satisfy most scholars? Because it works within the text's own world. Ezekiel is a priest. He knows temple symbolism. He's familiar with cherubim, thrones, divine glory language. When he sees this vision, he's not inventing new categories, he's experiencing familiar symbols in an overwhelming, mobile form. The vision uses the vocabulary of ancient Near Eastern throne iconography. Four-faced beings? Common in Assyrian and Babylonian art. Wheels as divine transport? The sun god's chariot had wheels. Gleaming metal and fire? Standard theophany imagery, Moses at the burning bush, God descending on Sinai. Ezekiel isn't describing the incomprehensible. He's describing the numinous, the holy other, using symbols his culture provided. No spacecraft needed. No aliens required. The vision is strange, overwhelming, and powerful as religious experience. But there's one more framework. One that doesn't choose between divine and technological. One that says, what if the source wasn't external at all? Before we move to the psychological explanation, there's one question we need to address. Do modern UFO reports share characteristics with Ezekiel's vision? The answer is yes. And it's why the ancient astronaut theory refuses to die. Brilliant lights and fire. Ezekiel, flashing fire, radiance around it, fire and lightning. Modern UFO reports consistently describe bright lights, often described as blinding, glowing, or pulsating. Multidirectional movement without turning. Ezekiel, they did not turn as they moved, wherever the spirit would go, they would go. UFO reports, objects moving at right angles, instant directional changes, hovering, ascending vertically, all without visible rotation or reorientation. Loud sound. Ezekiel, sound like mighty waters, like the voice of Shaddai, like an army. UFO reports, humming, roaring, rumbling, though some report complete silence. Unusual beings. Ezekiel, four-faced creatures with wings and hands. UFO encounter reports, beings with unusual features, large eyes, elongated limbs, non-human but vaguely anthropomorphic. Rapid movement like a flash. Ezekiel, like the appearance of lightning. UFO reports, disappeared in an instant, shot across the sky faster than anything I've seen. The parallels are real. But do they mean Ezekiel saw the same thing modern witnesses report, or do they mean we're interpreting ancient visions through the lens of modern UFO culture? June 24, 1947. M.T. Rainier, Washington. Kenneth Arnold, a private pilot, businessman, respected in his community, is flying his small plane near the mountain when he sees something. 9 bright, shiny objects flying in formation. Moving at extraordinary speed. Weaving through the peaks like the tail of a Chinese kite. He estimates their speed, over 1,200 miles per hour, faster than any aircraft in 1947. Arnold lands. He reports what he saw. A reporter asks him to describe the movement. Arnold says they moved like a saucer skipping across water. The press runs with it. Flying saucers. The term sticks. The modern UFO era begins. The U.S. Air Force investigates. Project Sign. Project Grudge. Project Blue Book, thousands of reports, 2 decades of analysis. An Arnold sighting? Never explained. Still classified as unidentified. Multidirectional movement. Brilliant light. Extraordinary speed. Sound familiar? Project Blue Book ran from 1952 to 1969. Over 12,000 UFO reports investigated. The official conclusions. 1. No UFO reported, investigated, and evaluated by the Air Force has ever given any indication of threat to national security. 2. There has been no evidence submitted to or discovered by the Air Force that sightings categorized as unidentified represent technological developments or principles beyond the range of present-day scientific knowledge. 3. There has been no evidence indicating that sightings categorized as unidentified are extraterrestrial vehicles. Most sightings were explained: weather balloons, aircraft, planets, atmospheric phenomena, hoaxes. But 701 cases, about 6%, remained unidentified. Not because they were alien spacecraft. Because there wasn't enough data to determine what they were. The point: decades of investigation by engineers, scientists, and military analysts found no evidence of extraterrestrial craft. Not in 1947. Not in 1974 when Blumrich published his book. Not today. So if modern UFO reports don't prove alien visitation, why would an ancient text? Here's the interpretive problem. When you know UFO culture, you see UFOs everywhere. Ezekiel's wheels become landing gear. His living creatures become sensor pods. His throne becomes a cockpit. But before 1947, before flying saucers entered popular consciousness, no one read Ezekiel chapter 1 that way. Not medieval scholars. Not Renaissance commentators. Not 19th century theologians. The spacecraft reading didn't exist until spacecraft existed. That doesn't prove it's wrong. But it suggests we might be importing modern categories onto ancient texts, seeing what we expect to see, just like every generation before us. Or, maybe, the phenomenon is real, recurring across millennia, and we're only now developing the language to describe it. Which brings us to the third framework. The one that says, Ezekiel's experience was real, but the source was internal. Ezekiel wasn't just a priest. He was a prophet. And prophets, across cultures and centuries, report visionary experiences. The text itself describes Ezekiel in altered states. The hand of YHWH was upon him. The Spirit lifted me up. I fell on my face. I sat overwhelmed among the exiles for 7 days. These aren't the words of someone having a casual theological reflection. This is the language of ecstatic experience, overwhelming, disorienting, transformative. Across ancient cultures, visionary experiences share common features: encounters with otherworldly beings, intense sensory phenomena, light, sound, motion, feelings of transcendence, time distortion, profound emotional impact. Ezekiel's vision fits this pattern perfectly. And the question becomes, was the source external, whether divine or technological, or was it internal, generated by Ezekiel's own neurophysiology in a heightened spiritual state? Modern neuroscience offers frameworks for understanding visionary experiences without dismissing them. Temporal lobe epilepsy is associated with hyperreligiosity, intense spiritual experiences, feelings of divine presence, visions of religious figures. Some patients report ecstatic auras before seizures, bliss, unity, timelessness, profound meaning. Research on ecstatic seizures points to the anterior insula, a brain region involved in self-awareness and interception. Stimulation of this area can produce feelings of ecstasy, transcendence, and unity with the cosmos. Migraine aura can generate geometric visual patterns, spirals, grids, wheels, radial symmetry, bright lights, fortification patterns. The kind of visual phenomena that could be interpreted as wheels full of eyes, crystalline expanses, radiant thrones. This doesn't mean Ezekiel just had a seizure. It means the brain is capable of generating profound, meaningful, transformative experiences without external stimuli. A mystical vision can be neurologically grounded and spiritually significant. The two aren't mutually exclusive. Here's the key distinction. Ezekiel's experience was real to Ezekiel. He genuinely saw what he described. He genuinely felt the presence of the divine. The vision shaped his prophetic ministry, his message, his entire life. That subjective reality is undeniable. But subjective certainty doesn't prove external reality. A dream feels real while you're dreaming. A hallucination can be vivid, detailed, and emotionally powerful. That doesn't mean the dreamed or hallucinated entities exist outside your mind. The psychological framework says Ezekiel had a genuine, powerful, transformative visionary experience. It was real. It was meaningful. It shaped history. But it doesn't require a spacecraft, and it doesn't require a literal throne hovering over Babylon. It requires a human brain in an altered state, capable of extraordinary perceptual and spiritual experiences. 3 frameworks. 3 explanations. Same text. And the question remains. So, what did Ezekiel see? The divine throne chariot. Merkaba mysticism. The glory of YHWH. Cherubim and Ophanim attending God's mobile throne. A theophany, manifestation of divine presence to a people in exile. This interpretation has endured for 2,500 years. It fits the text's own world. It requires no anachronism, no modern technology, no external visitation. The extraterrestrial spacecraft. Josef Blumrich's engineering analysis. An ancient astronaut encounter. Omnidirectional landing gear, helicopter rotors, sensor arrays, a pilot in a command module. He patented a working wheel based on it. Mainstream scholars call it pseudoscience, forcing modern technology onto ancient symbolism. But the engineer who designed Saturn V parts took it seriously enough to write a book. The Visionary Psychological Experience. Ezekiel in an altered state. Temporal lobe activity, ecstatic seizure, mystical contemplation. The experience was real, powerful, and transformative, but internally generated. No external craft. No literal throne. A human brain producing numinous experience. Subjective reality, not external verification. All 3 frameworks take Ezekiel seriously. All 3 respect the text. All 3 explain some of the details. None explain all of them. Here's what we know for certain. Ezekiel chapter 1 exists. The description is detailed, consistent, and strange. Wheels within wheels, full of eyes all around. Moving in any direction without turning. The spirit of the living creatures in the wheels. That text has been read, interpreted, debated, and revered for 26 centuries. Jewish mystics saw the throne of God and called it forbidden knowledge. Christian theologians saw divine glory and called it theophany. A NASA engineer saw a spacecraft and patented a wheel. Neurologists see altered brain states and ecstatic vision. The text remains. The interpretations diverge. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the vision's power isn't in having one correct answer, but in its capacity to generate meaning across radically different frameworks. We leave you with the question. Divine throne chariot? Extraterrestrial spacecraft? Visionary psychological experience? Or something else entirely, something we haven't considered, something outside our categories? The text is there. The descriptions are precise. The interpretations are yours. If you want to explore more biblical mysteries that resist easy answers, check out episode 23, The Nephilim, Giants, Fallen Angels, and the Verse That Sparked 3,000 Years of Debate. Or episode 25, The Book of Enoch, the Bible's deleted chapters and the knowledge that was too dangerous to preserve. We don't tell you what to believe. We show you what the texts actually say, what the evidence actually shows, and we let you decide. Subscribe for more biblical mysteries presented without dogma. New episodes every week. Until next time, keep questioning. Keep exploring. And remember, the mystery is often more valuable than the answer.